All right, let's talk a little bit about how do you brew coffee like this. So this is the coffee we featured the other day, which is Billy Maymon Thailand, which is an anaerobic natural Thai coffee coming from my friend Pak. So please check those videos out. But this is a very unique coffee. And I think what I want to cover in this video is just an approach and kind of thought process on these newer regions of coffee, both from a brewing perspective, but also a processing perspective. Both basically, how do you make these coffees taste good, especially in today's landscape where you have these like ultra lightly roasted wash coffees, and everybody wants to push coffees in a certain direction, or you can't brew this coffee the exact same way as you brew something like that, or cleaner coffees, as what people would say, right? What do you want to keep in mind when you brew a coffee like this? Well, I think what's interesting is to actually think a little bit more about these regions, these newer regions, and like where they are at in the landscape of coffee processing. So in this example, this is a anaerobic natural Thai coffee. So it has, I would say, two things working against it. One is it's an anaerobic natural. A lot of times if you brew anaerobic naturally processed coffee, or you brew, high fermentation coffees and you over extract them, the processing really falls apart and it just tastes really bitter and ashy. And the second thing that's like working against this coffee would be that it is a newer region. So it's a Thai coffee. You'll also find this same thing with things like Chinese coffees, Taiwan coffees, Indonesian coffees. A lot of those Asian coffees, they're new. If you taste the terroir, I often classify it like you could taste things like wood, dirt, ashiness as well, but it's different type of ashiness. And you basically can taste that it is a newer plant, if that makes sense. An example here where you have a lot of these Thai producers now tapping into a lot of what these Colombian producers were doing many years ago, right? They're much newer, and Colombia is much further ahead in this type of processing, like anaerobic natural, right? Where you have like a quote unquote not so good plant that then has fermentation on it, right? And this is why like people who like these clean ultralight wash coffees really dislike these types of coffees. And I think one, it's that maybe it's the brewing, but second of all, it is new, right? You have to deal with fermentation in brewing, and you also have to deal with new plants and new region and so on and so forth when you are handling these coffees. If you guys remember a video that I posted like a while ago, it was brewing this crazy co-fermented coffee with mod cup, and the gist of that was just use lower agitation, lower temperatures, and then also use lower clarity gear. And I think that still really applies for a coffee like this, but I kind of think now, at least this specific coffee, I've tasted this coffee across the past few years, it's gotten to a point where you can actually kind of push the coffee a little harder. I know you guys picked this coffee up, so I just will show you guys what I'm doing, but also discuss maybe a little bit more of like my thought process in today's landscape of brewing coffee. And the gist of all of this is that I think, especially if you are getting a quality Thai coffee like this, what you can actually just end up doing is really just lowering temperature. You actually could brew a lot of these coffees, not quite aggressively, like not so, hardcore, like, this washed Bolivia coffee that is roasted very light. I can't push this coffee as hard as that, but what I can do is I can do things that try to bring out the expressiveness and interesting components of a coffee like this through brewing, while also retaining enough of the Thai terroir in this example, where it's like, I don't want to brew in a way that completely eliminates what makes this region interesting, right? And a lot of the times what you'll detect of what makes a region interesting, or like, if you taste the same varietal in a bunch of different regions, for me at least, it's usually the aftertaste. Like after that initial component of acidity, no matter if it's, natural, wash, whatever, you taste that, and then it's like everything after that. So in the case of these newer coffees, you'll taste processing. So in this case, anaerobic natural processing. Then after that, I get some of the terroir effect, which in a lot of Thailand coffees, to me, it's usually like a black milk tea. It's very tea-like. And in Taiwan coffee, it's also the same thing, like a very tea-like effect, but specifically there's like a milkiness and creaminess in Thai coffee that I think is super fascinating, and I truly believe Southeast Asia is on the come up. So let's go ahead and actually brew. The way I brew nowadays, I'm literally just going to actually brew this very similarly to actually how I would brew this. But what I'm going to adjust is my basic variables, which is temperature and flow rate. I think temperature and flow rate are the greatest tools in making any of these coffees taste really, really nice. Of course, like this really depends on grinder. I'm actually going to intentionally use a high clarity grinder today, just to see like, you know, if I reduce temperature to a certain point, can I make this coffee taste good? I've done this before, so that's why I can tell you it will work. Without going too deep into this, there are a lot of ways you can accomplish like the same extraction, if that makes sense. And how you accomplish that extraction is highly dependent on a lot of things, like, you know, your agitation, the grind size, and so on and so forth. But I think this is what makes coffee brewing interesting, is the dynamics, right? It's like we can accomplish the same TDS, the same extraction, but how we accomplish that is, you know, fun, right? It's where you can make things more like sweetness forward, more balanced, more acidity forward, and so on and so forth. With these Thai coffees, with these anaerobic, you know, newer coffees, I find that you do actually want to do agitation. In this example, I will wet WDT, but because there is that potential risk of pushing the processing over and pushing the terroir too far, you want to really lower temperature to compensate. What I find still is during bloom, if you agitate the, you know, everything, it seems to really bring out a lot of acidity. So I still do that, and then I just do a simple 2 mellow drip pour with this, and I pour slightly slower. So if you have seen how I brew the Raquel Lasso, like this washed geisha, these like crazier coffees, I still do the same exact thing, but what I do is I generally am pouring around 10 to 12 mils a second on that. For this on mellow drip, I'll be pouring around 5, and the temperature I'm using is 90 Celsius. We'll taste it and we'll see, well, we should be able to tell if this is too hot of a temperature or maybe we need to go lower. But I find that anything above, like, you know, I still think 92 is a very good starting point, but lower temperature, like I think we shouldn't be so afraid of using lower temperature nowadays, especially given, you know, understanding like why that works a little bit better for a coffee like this, which generally you get a lot more sweetness, a lot more rounding, and also the fact that we can now just, you know, agitate a lot of things and extract coffee. I've been rambling on for a while. Let's go ahead and actually brew. So this is a very fruit-forward Thai coffee, and you definitely smell fermentation. To me, I smell the classic anaerobic natural fermentation, which, you know, to some people is like very chemical-y. Phenol is a word that people use a lot, but I do smell a very like different finish, right? You get the processing, this layering, and then everything else is the Thai terroir. So very tea-like, black tea-like. And I am going to be using this brewer here, which is the Timor Crystalli. And I just am brewing a single cup of coffee here. So I'm brewing 15 grams, and then I'm just using, these are actually X-Bloom filters, but these are, you know, fast-flowing paper filters. I think a lot of you guys are going to be smart enough, you know, you'll be able to adjust like the grind sizes and the temperature and all of that, but it's now, I think, down to like just larger picture methodology, which is like, okay, we should think a little bit more about how the coffee is processed and how, you know, where it's from and all of that when we handle brewing, right? Which I think seems reasonable. All right, let's grind this up. I have 15 grams. The other thing to also really keep in mind is ratios. I find that if you just do, you know, your 1 to 15, your 1 to 16 ratios, these are completely fine for coffees like this. If you go too large of a ratio, you still end up with that same effect of like stretching the coffee too far, pushing the coffee too hard. In my experience with newer regions of coffee like Thailand, it doesn't really seem to work out very well because, you know, the actual plants aren't there yet, right? They're not to a point where it's like you can mega extract them and they'll still hold up, if that makes sense. Because again, you're in this example with this coffee, you're dealing with the anaerobic natural processing, and you're also dealing with the newer region. You know, for example, this is like a high-end 98 millimeter grinder. I generally, depending on, of course, burr set, I generally want shorter contact times. Although your contact times are of course, dependent on how fast you pour. And I still think it's down to the, how you agitate the coffee. So this coffee, to me, you smell that fermentation, you smell the anaerobic natural, and you smell the terroir here, which is like this, I would say tea-like black tea that's in here, but definitely fermentation forward. So I have 15 grams in here. I mean, this entire methodology works on any of these brewers. And what I'm just going to do is I actually am just pouring 60 quite fast. So I think this is the part where it brings out a lot of the acidity, right? Like this, and then you just wet WDT. This is what makes this specific coffee very interesting, which is this red cherry apple note. As you also see, I have the kettle just fully off here, and I start at 90 Celsius, and I'm actually just going to let this bloom. So it's everything else after this that I think you have to be a little bit more careful of. Like doing this, I think brings out that like bright acidity or interesting acidity in a lot of these newer regions of coffee, which generally is going to be that process, right? It's going to be like, what is that process? And letting it bloom, letting it open up does work out, right? You can let it bloom 45 seconds, 1 minute, like I'm letting this bloom all the way up to a minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mellow drip at about 5 mils a second. So I'm doing about 5 mils a second, or 5 to 8 mils a second, but generally around 5 mils a second. And I am going in circular patterns pretty actually close to the bed. I'm going up to about 170. So I find if you go pretty close to the bed and you go circular, it does a very similar effect as if you were to swirl the brewer. And if you fill it up pretty fast, you get all the weird fines, all the bad stuff getting pushed out. As you can see here, this is an anaerobic natural. It flows through very fast. When the water almost flows all the way through, continue to add more and do the exact same thing. And I'm just going to go up to 240. I'm pouring about the same, 5 to 8 mils a second. There we go. This is a pretty quick brew at around maybe 2.5 minutes. Around there, I think for these coffees is probably fine. Of course, this depends on your grinder. If you have a lower clarity grinder, I definitely think maybe longer would be helpful. This grinder, we could of course adjust grind size and all of that, but this finished in around 215. This color here is pretty extracted. And a lot of that was, if you paid attention to the bloom is like very, very dark when I'm agitating it. Wow. I mean, I think Thai coffee, in this example, man, Thai coffee has gotten so good across the last few years. It is super fascinating to see a region like this develop. But it might be hard to see on camera here, but what I have here is I add the water, so I end up pushing up the fines here, and I push up all the weird boulders and all the weird looking stuff. And that is the advantage of the mellow drip. And doing it in a circular pattern helps me push everything out to those edges there. I've shown this many times before. If you want to see more, of course I can talk more about that. But if you brew, doing wet WDT and mellow drip, what you'll generally taste if you do something similar to me on like every grinder is you get that acidity presentation up front, and then it goes into that like, balanced and sweet, more sterile tasting mellow drip flavor profile. And I think that is what works out really well for a newer region like Thailand and these more processed coffees, is that you get the acidity. Like these producers are now getting to a point where they can get that interesting acidity, right? This sparkly acidity or brightness in their coffee. But we then need to deal with how that processing is. We have to be careful of, not pushing that processing over too much. And we also have to be careful of the, terroir, right? We don't want to bring potentially too much of the terroir out, because at least if you're used to drinking light and bright wash coffee, you're going to dislike that. So a lot of, people say, oh, it tastes like dirt, right? Like I often see a lot of enthusiasts complain like Indian coffee tastes like dirt, or Thai coffee tastes like, forest and all of that, right? And that is currently the case in the landscape of processing. Producers have gotten a lot better, but we can handle that in brewing. Oh, wow. So this is interesting. Of course, if you have this bag of coffee too and you got it, please try this recipe out. But very, very red fruit acidity. Then I get this Thai coffee terroir, which is that I would say black milk tea, very creamy, long linger of sweetness. I do taste a little bit of that terroir though, right? Like, potentially that is the processing and coffee not necessarily falling apart, but we do taste that it is, not the most developed plant out there. And a lot of the times that is just like the reality of this new region, right? Like Indonesian coffees, Thai coffees, Indian coffees, Taiwan coffees, China coffees. Sometimes, especially if they're newer, they'll have that like dirt and muddy taste, which is what we want to minimize. But there's stuff before that dirt effect, which is what is the terroir, right? It's what this specific coffee tastes, it's what these coffees taste like, and we don't want to completely eliminate it through brewing, right? I at least for me, I'm like, I want to still showcase that in here, right? So one, it's showcasing the interesting processing, and two, it's showcasing, the actual terroir here, right? And to me, I get that red fruit acidity, and then I get the Thai coffee effect, which is the Thai coffee terroir, and then maybe at the back, I get a tinge of that like dirt that people don't like, right? But majority of what is in this cup is interesting to me, right? Especially as somebody who likes wash coffee and you try all these different coffees, right? Like this is the new stuff, and I think we, need to actually brew these coffees in a way that showcases them well, right? And a lot of times you can form your opinion on a coffee or roaster or whatever through brewing, and I just want to showcase like, look, we should approach these regions a slightly different way. And you'll also find that a lot of these coffees should be a little more developed, right? Like, I think it's like these coffees are not still in a place where I think roasters feel comfortable roasting them like ultra lightly, because those coffees will fall apart. And they just taste really, really weird. So I do think a lot of the times you end up with like, more development. In this example, this coffee is light, but it's very sweetness focused. Like it has been cooked a bit longer. So we get a lot of lovely sweetness from the roasting style, and it's not trying to cover up, the fact that it's Thai if you watched the video on roasting this coffee. So I just want to like keep that kind of methodology of how, maybe somebody, how like some of these coffees are roasted. It's like, let's still showcase what is in this coffee, but let's not expose too much of it at times, because it could end up being unenjoyable, especially if you are a coffee enthusiast. Now that this has really cooled down, this is the thing with these newer regions of coffee too, is let these coffees really, really cool down. I've been talking because I've been waiting for this coffee to cool. Let these coffees really, really cool down, because when these coffees are at almost above room temperature, that is when they are very, very transparent. And that is where you can taste processing and terroir, like what has been done to the plant. Generally speaking, a lot of times, you'll taste that layering. Oh yeah, I get the processing, then I get the varietal and all of that. With these newer regions, what can happen, and a lot of people love it or hate it, is you find a distinct separation between processing and varietal. So in this case, and I think what a lot of people would classify as higher end coffee, higher scoring coffee, is there is a less of a split between the two. There's less of, oh, I can taste processed, then I can taste varietal, right? And now we're getting to a point, at least with Thailand coffees, where they're like we're starting to see a little bit more harmony between the two, especially when like this is just a little bit above room temperature now. Really, really structured red fruit, anaerobic process for sure. Then I can detect maybe a little bit of separation between that processing and that Thai terroir. And the Thai terroir to me is that black milk tea. Then it's that long linger sweetness. Then I do get a little bit of, that dirt, that muddiness, that newer plant, newer region taste that a lot of these, you'll be able to taste it if you've tasted enough of these newer regions of coffee. That's what is in here. So that's like what I just really wanted to highlight, is just like when we brew these coffees, like, yeah, our recipes are great, and this is how you adjust your things, at least how I'm doing it specifically for these newer regions of coffee, is, focus on the temperature, focus on the agitation, focus on when to do high agitation and low agitation. And I think you can manipulate, at least to your flavor preferences, like, what works out. But if we just take a step back and we think a little bit more about like what the processing is, why is that process even there, and why they're doing that type of processing, and where they are in that journey of, I would say, planting trees and all of that, right? This is new in this example, and we can adjust our expectations and adjust our brewing style to that, right? Like I feel like that's pretty straightforward. So yeah, that's all rambly video about these newer regions of coffee, but also like how I think we should try to brew them. It's fun, right? It's really amazing to see how this coffee region has developed across the last few years, and the fact that we can even be doing higher agitation and be brewing these coffees and quote unquote even trying to push these coffees is a fantastic. It's fantastic. It's awesome. It's awesome that we can get coffees like this. I want more people to try these newer regions of coffee. That's just how it is. So yeah, thank you guys so much for spending time watching this video. I hope this was interesting. If you have any questions, discuss in the Discord. But otherwise, yeah, try out some new goofy regions of coffee and processing. And yeah, see you guys later.